She stood frozen at the altar, the whispers rising around her like a tide. The man she thought she knew, the struggling photographer with worn shoes and a secondhand camera, was suddenly someone else entirely. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner," he whispered, his eyes still holding the same warmth she'd fallen for. "But I needed to know you loved me for me, not for the crown." The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee and old books through the open door of Everhart's. Reed's, a charming, if somewhat struggling, independent bookstore, nestled between a vintage record shop and an artisanal bakery. Livia Everhart, 32, with chestnut hair typically bundled in a messy bun and reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose, was rushing to make it to her own store on time. She had overslept after staying up until 3 in the morning, finishing a novel she simply couldn't put down, an occupational hazard of being a bookstore owner with an insatiable appetite for stories. Clutching her oversized travel mug of coffee while attempting to unlock the store's front door, she didn't notice the tall figure rounding the corner at the exact same moment. The collision was brief, but catastrophic for her white blouse. "Oh, my God, I am so sorry," Livia gasped, watching in horror as her precious morning caffeine created an artistic brown Rorschach test across the stranger's simple gray Henley. The stranger, a man with the kind of casual dishevelment that suggested he either didn't own a comb or didn't believe in their purpose, looked down at his now stained shirt with raised eyebrows. For a terrible moment, Livia prepared for an angry tirade, mentally calculating if the store's meager profits could cover dry cleaning costs. Instead, the man laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine rich laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way that was unfairly appealing. "Well," he said, his voice warm with amusement, "I was planning to spill coffee on myself later today anyway, so you've actually saved me some time." His accent was faint but distinctive, European perhaps, though Livia couldn't quite place it. Livia's mouth twitched despite her mortification. "That was definitely my plan all along. I'm actually a professional time saver. I go around the city completing tasks people were going to do anyway." She gestured helplessly at his shirt. "Please let me pay for the cleaning, or a new shirt, or something." The stranger glanced down at himself again, as if assessing the damage with the critical eye of a fashion expert, though his worn jeans and scuffed boots suggested fashion was not his primary concern. "I have a counteroffer," he said, a playful gleam in his hazel eyes. "You can buy me a replacement coffee since mine is now wearing your shirt." Livia blinked. "But I'm the one who spilled on you." "Yes, but I've tragically lost my coffee." "In the incident," he replied with mock seriousness. "And you still have yours." He nodded toward her now half-empty travel mug. "That's not how apologies work," Livia said, finding herself smiling despite the situation. "No? Then perhaps you should spill on me again tomorrow so we can try a different approach." The corner of his mouth quirked upward in a way that made Livia suddenly very aware that she hadn't brushed her hair and was wearing her most comfortable, which was code for least flattering, jeans. "I'm Livia," she said, extending her hand, before she could overthink it. "Livia Everhart. This is my bookstore, and I promise I don't usually assault customers with hot beverages." "Remy Westcott," he replied, taking her hand. His palm was warm and slightly calloused. "Photographer, and I'll take that coffee as a rain check, if that's all right with you. I'm actually running late for a shoot." Livia nodded, suddenly conscious of the fact that they were still holding hands. She withdrew hers perhaps a bit too quickly. "Of course. Good luck with your photography." She cringed internally at how awkward she sounded. Remy grinned as if he found her discomfort endearing, rather than off-putting. "I'll stop by tomorrow. Maybe try to wear something brown." With a small wave, he continued down the sidewalk, the coffee stain already forgotten. Livia watched him go for a moment longer than was strictly necessary before remembering she had a bookstore to open. She turned back to the stubborn lock, a small, unbidden smile playing at her lips. It wasn't until she was switching on the lights that she realized he had somehow managed to make her feel like she had come out ahead in their encounter, despite the fact that she had ruined his shirt. And he was the one who deserved an apology. True to his word, Remy appeared at her shop the next day, this time deliberately wearing a dark brown shirt that made Livia laugh out loud when she spotted him browsing the poetry section. "Very funny," she called out. "I see you came prepared." He looked up with that same easy smile that somehow transformed his otherwise ordinary features into something magnetic. "I believe you owe me a coffee, Ms. Everhart," he said, setting down the slim volume of Pablo Neruda he'd been flipping through. "I believe I offered to pay for your dry cleaning, Mr. Westcott," she countered, but she was already reaching for her purse. "There's a decent place next door if you have time." The decent place turned into a 2-hour conversation about everything from 19th century literature to the ethical implications of street photography. Remy, it turned out, specialized in documentary photography, capturing everyday moments of people going about their lives. "The beauty of the ordinary," he called it, his eyes alight with genuine passion. "There's something magical about freezing a moment that would otherwise be lost forever." "Like a book," Livia said thoughtfully, "capturing a moment in time, a feeling, a perspective that might otherwise slip away." Remy's gaze settled on her with unexpected intensity. Exactly like that. The way he said it made it feel like she had articulated something profound rather than obvious, and Livia felt a warm flutter of connection that she hadn't experienced in a very long time. That coffee led to another, which led to dinner the following week, which somehow evolved into Remy becoming a regular fixture at Everhart's Reads. He would often sit quietly in the corner with his laptop, editing photos while Livia helped customers. Sometimes he would disappear for days at a time on assignment, returning with stories of small towns or urban explorations, but never anything that sounded particularly glamorous or well-paying. His camera equipment, while professional, wasn't the top-of-the-line gear that successful photographers often flaunted. "Don't you ever want to upgrade?" Livia asked one evening as they walked through the park after closing the shop, watching him handle his battered camera with tender care. Remy shrugged, his arm brushing against hers in a way that felt both casual and deliberate. "This one has character. It's seen the world with me." He smiled that crooked smile that had become dangerously familiar to her. "Besides, it's not about the equipment. It's about the eye behind it." "That sounds suspiciously like something a photographer with outdated equipment would say," Livia teased, earning a playful nudge. "Not all of us can be successful business moguls like yourself," he retorted, gesturing grandly back toward her modest bookstore. "Some of us have to scrape by on our artistic integrity and rugged good looks." Livia snorted. "My vast bookstore empire is indeed the envy of Amazon, and your rugged good looks could use a haircut." She reached up to brush a strand of his perpetually tousled hair away from his eyes, the casual intimacy of the gesture catching them both by surprise. Remy caught her hand before she could pull it away, his expression shifting from playful to something softer. "Livia," he said quietly, "would it be all right if I kissed you now?" The question hung between them, fragile and perfect, as the evening light filtered through the trees. Livia felt her heart skip in a way that romance novels had led her to believe was figurative rather than literal. "I thought you'd never ask," she whispered, and closed the distance between them. Their relationship blossomed with a natural ease that took Livia by surprise. Remy fit into her life as if he had always been meant to be there, bringing laughter and spontaneity to her otherwise structured days. He never seemed bothered by her modest lifestyle or the fact that much of her income went back into keeping her beloved bookstore afloat. In fact, he seemed to prefer the simplicity of their dates, homemade dinners in her small apartment above the shop, impromptu picnics, long walks through hidden parts of the city he somehow always knew about. There were oddities, of course. Occasional phone calls he would step away to take, speaking in low, urgent tones in a language she didn't recognize. The fact that despite his apparent lack of funds, he never seemed genuinely worried about money. The way he sometimes looked at ordinary things, a family eating ice cream, an elderly couple holding hands, children playing in a fountain, with a strange mixture of longing and wistfulness. "What are you thinking about when you look like that?" she asked him once as they sat on a park bench, watching a young father teach his daughter how to ride a bike. Remy was quiet for so long that Livia thought he might not have heard her. "I'm thinking about what it would be like to have a normal life," he finally said, his voice distant. Livia frowned, studying his profile. "As opposed to what? Your extraordinarily glamorous life as a struggling photographer who dates a bookstore owner?" She meant it as a joke, but Remy didn't laugh. Instead, he turned to her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. "As opposed to any life that doesn't have you in it," he said simply, and kissed her before she could ask what he meant. The questions multiplied over time. Why did he never talk about his family beyond vague mentions of a complicated relationship? With his father? How did he afford to travel for his photography assignments when he drove a car that was at least 15 years old? Why did he sometimes catch her watching him with an expression that bordered on guilt? But for every question, there were a dozen moments that made such concerns seem trivial. The way he remembered how she took her tea, the handwritten notes he would hide in books for her to find, the genuine interest he took in her dreams of expanding the bookstore someday. When they made love, there was an intensity to him, as if he was trying to memorize every moment, every sensation, every whispered word between them. 6 months into their relationship, Remy suggested a weekend camping trip to see the meteor shower that was predicted to be spectacular. You, me, the stars, and absolutely no cell phone reception, he enticed, rubbing small circles on her palm with his thumb in the way that unfailingly made her agree to his more adventurous suggestions. "You do remember that my idea of roughing, it is a hotel without room service, right?" Livia reminded him, though they both knew she would go. She had never been able to resist the childlike enthusiasm that overtook him whenever he planned their excursions. The campsite he chose was remote, but stunning, perched on a cliff overlooking a valley that stretched out like a patchwork quilt of farmland and forest. As night fell and the first meteors began to streak across the sky, they lay side by side on a blanket, fingers intertwined, the vastness of the universe spread out above them. "Make a wish," Remy whispered, as a particularly bright meteor left, a glowing trail across the darkness. Livia turned her head to look at him, his profile illuminated by starlight. "I don't need to," she said honestly. "I already have everything I could wish for." Something in her words seemed to solidify a decision for Remy. He sat up suddenly, tugging her with him. "Livia," he began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous, "I need to tell you something." Her stomach dropped. This was it, she thought. The explanation for all the small mysteries, the strange inconsistencies. Perhaps he was married, or in witness protection, or had terminal cancer. Her mind raced through increasingly dramatic scenarios. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. And I know we haven't been together that long, but He fumbled in his pocket, producing a small velvet box that made Livia's breath catch. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you'll have me." In his nervousness, the box slipped from his fingers, disappearing into the grass beneath them. "Damn it," he muttered, the eloquence of his proposal giving way to frantic patting of the ground around them. "Hold on, I just had it." Livia burst out laughing, the tension of the moment breaking as they both scrambled for their phone flashlights, crawling around on hands and knees in search of the errant ring box. "Very smooth, Westcott," she teased, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "This isn't exactly how I planned it," Remy admitted, finally locating the box with a triumphant, "Aha!" He opened it to reveal a ring that was beautiful in its simplicity, solitary diamond set in what appeared to be a band of white gold, elegant without being ostentatious. "Livia Everhart, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The answer was immediate and absolute. "Yes," she said, tears spilling over as he slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, under the canopy of stars, and Livia thought that no moment in her life had ever felt more perfect or more right. Whatever secrets he might be keeping, whatever complications lay ahead, she knew with bone-deep certainty that this man was her future. The wedding planning was remarkably straightforward, largely because neither of them wanted anything elaborate. Remy had no family to invite. "It's complicated," was all he would say when she pressed, and Livia's family consisted of her mother, Eleanor, her younger sister Penelope, and her eccentric aunt Mabel, who read tarot cards professionally and claimed to have once dated a minor British royal. They chose a small venue, a historic stone building with a garden that burst with wildflowers in the late spring. "Are you sure you don't want something more significant?" Eleanor asked her daughter dubiously over wedding cake samples. "You're only going to do this once, sweetheart." "Mom, this is exactly what we want," Livia assured her, though a small part of her did wonder why Remy seemed almost relieved by their modest plans. He had the means to afford something a bit more special, surely. The ring he had given her, while not flashy, was certainly of good quality. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if the universe itself approved of their union. Livia dressed in a simple ivory gown that made her feel both elegant and comfortable, while Penelope arranged wildflowers in her hair with meticulous care. "You look like a fairy tale princess," her sister declared, stepping back to admire her. "Work," Livia laughed, the sound slightly breathless with nerves and excitement. "Just the bookstore owner marrying her photographer. No fairy tales here." The ceremony was intimate and deeply personal, with Aunt Mabel officiating after getting ordained, online specifically for the occasion. Remy waited at the altar, really just an arch of flowers at the end of the garden path, looking more handsome than Livia had ever seen him in a well-tailored suit that made her wonder again about those inconsistencies she had chosen to ignore. She walked toward him on her mother's arm. Livia could see nothing but the love shining in Remy's eyes, so pure and unguarded that it brought fresh tears to her own. This, she thought, was what people meant when they talked about knowing. This certainty, this rightness, this feeling of coming home. They exchanged simple vows they had written themselves, promises of loyalty and partnership, of supporting each other's dreams and facing life's challenges together. As Remy slid the wedding band on her finger to join her engagement ring, he hesitated, his expression shifting to one of gentle determination. "Before we complete this ceremony," he said, his voice carrying clearly to their small gathering of friends and family, "there's something I need to share." He took both of Livia's hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "Livia, when we met, I made a decision to show you only one part of who I am. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I needed to know that what grew between us was real, untainted by external factors." A murmur rippled through their guests. Livia felt her heart begin to race, a mixture of confusion and trepidation washing over her. "Remy, what are you talking about?" He smiled, but there was a nervous edge to it now. "My full name is Prince Remington Alden Westcott III, heir to the throne of Aldovia." He said it simply, as if commenting on the weather rather than revealing a bombshell that instantly transformed their entire relationship. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the dull thud of Aunt Mabel hitting the ground in a dead faint. I don't understand," Livia managed, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she knew, the one who wore the same 3 shirts in rotation and had once eaten cold spaghetti straight from the container, with the identity he was now claiming Remy, or Remington apparently, squeezed her hands gently. Aldovia is a small kingdom, but an old and prosperous one. I am its crown prince. The photography is real. It's my passion, not my profession. The assignments I go on are often diplomatic missions or charity work. The calls I take, those are royal duties I cannot escape, even when trying to live a normal life. Livia felt as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly tilted. You're rich? It seemed such an inadequate question in the face of what he was telling her, but it was all she could manage. A surprised laugh escaped him. Yes, Livia, quite rich, and technically, as of this moment, so are you. His expression sobered quickly. But that's not what matters. What matters is that every moment between us, every conversation, every laugh,
every kiss, that was real. I just needed to be sure you fell in love with me, not with a title or a fortune. From the ground, where she was being fanned by a concerned Penelope, Aunt Mabel suddenly piped up, "Do royals get discounts at supermarkets?"
before promptly fainting again. The absurdity of the question broke the tension, and Livia found herself laughing despite the shock still reverberating through her. You're a prince, she repeated, as if saying it aloud might help it make sense. A literal prince. Yes, he confirmed, watching her carefully. And if you want to walk away right now, I would understand. I've put you in an impossible position, springing this on you at our wedding of all places. But I couldn't let you marry me without knowing the truth, and I was too selfish, too afraid to tell you sooner and risk losing you. Livia studied. The man before her, the one she had agreed to spend her life with. His eyes were the same eyes that had looked at her with wonder when she spoke passionately about her favorite books. His hands were the same hands that had held her through her tears when a pipe burst in the bookstore, nearly destroying her inventory. His heart was the same heart that had opened to her, revealing dreams and vulnerabilities that had nothing to do with wealth or status. You lied to me, she said quietly. He flinched, as if she had struck him. Yes, by omission, but yes. And you're not just Remy the photographer who can't cook to save his life and leaves his socks on the bathroom floor. I am still very much that person, he assured her with a glimmer of his usual humor. The royal part is just an additional complication. Livia took a deep breath, aware that everyone was watching them, waiting for her reaction. Will I have to learn how to curtsy? Because I have terrible balance. Relief flooded his features, followed quickly by confusion. You're not furious with me? Oh, I'm definitely going to be furious later, Livia assured him with a small smile that belied her words. And you have a lot of explaining to do. But right now... She glanced around at their guests, at the beautiful garden they had chosen, together at the life they had been about to embark on before his revelation. Right now, I'm standing here in a white dress, looking at the man I love, and I still want to marry him. Prince or pauper, she squeezed his hands. Though I reserve the right to be thoroughly annoyed about the deception for at least the next year. The joy that transformed Remy's face was blinding. I accept those terms, he said, his voice rough, with emotion. And I promise, no more secrets. From this moment forward, you get all of me, royal duties, strange protocols, and all. In that case, Aunt Mabel announced, having recovered enough to resume her officiating duties, by the power vested in me by the internet, and apparently the kingdom of... what was it? Aldovia, Remy corrected gently. Right, that one. I now pronounce you husband and wife. She waved her hands with a flourish. You may kiss your princess bride, your majesty, highness, what's the correct term here? But Remy wasn't listening. He had already pulled Livia into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about the authenticity of his feelings, title or no title. The reception that followed was surreal. As champagne flowed, suddenly upgraded from the modest sparkling wine they had originally planned, Remy explained to their bewildered guests that a royal security team had been discreetly present all along. Two of their friends, a couple, who had claimed to be graphic designers, were actually his personal security detail. The simple wedding photographer was a highly trained professional who also happened to be the official royal photographer. So who else here is secretly royal? Livia's friend Zoe demanded, eyeing the bartender suspiciously. Just me, Remy assured her with a laugh, though I think Aunt Mabel might have some competing claims to nobility. The revelation transformed their honeymoon plans from a quiet week at a beach cottage to a private island that, as Remy casually mentioned, had been in his family for generations. But before they could depart, there was the small matter of introducing Livia to her new reality. The small matter turned out to be a whirlwind crash course in royal protocol, delivered by a stone-faced woman named Lady Henrietta, who materialized at their apartment the day after the wedding with a stack of binders and a permanently disappointed expression. "Your Royal Highness must never turn her back on the sovereign," Lady Henrietta instructed, as Livia tried desperately to keep track of the seemingly endless rules. One must not sit until His Majesty sits. One must not speak unless spoken to during formal gatherings, and one must certainly never, under any circumstances, discuss politics, religion, or the unfortunate incident with the Duke of Westmoreland's. Toupee at the Winter Ball of 2018. I feel like that last one has a story behind it, Livia muttered to Remy, who was watching the proceedings with ill-concealed amusement. "I'll tell you later," he promised in a whisper. "It involves a corgi and a chocolate fountain." The following weeks were a blur of palatial tours, media training. Apparently her new title warranted press attention, and increasingly desperate attempts to remember which fork to use for which course. Through it all, Remy remained her anchor, his love unwavering as she stumbled through the complexities of royal life. The real test came at her first official dinner, a gathering of diplomats and nobility that had Lady Henrietta in a state of near-constant anxiety. "Remember, Your Highness," she hissed as they prepared to enter the dining room, "the ambassador from Genovia is extremely sensitive about his height. Do not, under any circumstances, mention it." Livia, resplendent in a gown that cost more than 6 months of her bookstore's profits, nodded solemnly. She had spent hours practicing the correct way to walk, to sit, to smile without showing too many teeth. Apparently a royal no-no. As they were announced and all eyes turned to her, she felt her confidence waver. But then Remy was beside her, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Just be you," he whispered. "That's who they'll love. Just as I do." The dinner proceeded smoothly until the fish course, when Livia, momentarily forgetting her training, turned to the distinguished gentleman on her left and cheerfully addressed him as Your Majesty. The table fell silent as Lady Henrietta closed, her eyes in what appeared to be physical pain. "I'm so sorry," Livia said, mortification washing over her. "You're not the king, are you?" The man, who turned out to be the ambassador from Genovia, stared at her for a long moment before breaking into a hearty laugh. "My dear, that is the most flattering diplomatic error I have ever been subjected to. Usually people mistake me for the royal gardener." Livia's laugh of relief was genuine and uninhibited. "Well, if it helps, I once mistook my husband for a starving artist rather than a crown prince, so my track record with identifying people correctly is pretty abysmal." The table erupted in warm laughter, and just like that, the ice was broken. By dessert, Livia had charmed the entire gathering with her unaffected honesty and self-deprecating humor, a refreshing change from the usual carefully calculated royal interactions. "You were magnificent," Remy told her later as they retired to their chambers, a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment back home. "I called an ambassador, Your Majesty," she reminded him, kicking off the uncomfortable but exquisite heels she'd been wearing. Lady Henrietta looked like she was contemplating throwing herself on her letter opener. "Henrietta has looked like that since I was 5 and spilled grape juice on a 16th century tapestry," Remy dismissed with a wave. "But you were yourself, warm, funny, genuine. Do you have any idea how rare that is in these circles? They adored you. Livia allowed herself to be folded into his embrace, savoring the feeling of being held by the man who, despite his royal status, was still fundamentally her Remy. I'm glad, because I'm not sure I could keep up the perfect princess. Act for long. That's precisely why you're perfect for this role, he murmured against her hair. Because you won't try to be someone you're not. Their honeymoon was a blissful escape from the pressures of royal life, a chance to simply be Livia and Remy again, albeit on a stunningly beautiful private island with a staff that appeared and disappeared with disconcerting stealth. But all too soon, reality intruded in the form of an urgent message from the palace. A diplomatic crisis required the crown prince's immediate return. I have to go, Remy told her, regret etched deeply in his features. It's complicated, but it involves a treaty my father has been working on for years. If it falls apart now, I understand, Livia assured him, though her heart sank at the thought of being separated so soon after their wedding. Will I come with you? Remy hesitated, and she could see him struggling with the decision. The situation is volatile, he finally said. There have been threats. Nothing unusual for the royal family, but in this particular climate, I would never forgive myself if something happened to you because of who I am. And so, barely a month into their marriage, Livia found herself back in their apartment above the bookstore, attempting to resume her normal life while her husband, a literal prince, navigated a geopolitical crisis half a world away. The separation stretched from days into weeks, their only connection being encrypted video calls that offered tantalizingly brief glimpses into each other's lives. You look tired, Livia observed during one such call, studying the shadows beneath. Remy's eyes with concern. Royal diplomacy is surprisingly exhausting, he admitted with a weak smile. Turns out sitting through 12-course dinners while maintaining perfect posture and never mentioning how much you'd rather be anywhere else is actually hard work. Sounds awful, she sympathized. I spent my day alphabetizing the mystery section and explaining to a customer why we don't carry 50 copies of the latest bestseller. Very high-stakes stuff. His laugh was genuine but tinged with longing. I miss you, Liv, more than I can possibly express. I miss you too, she said softly. When do you think you'll be home? The question hung between them, laden with uncertainty. Soon, he promised, though they both knew soon in diplomatic terms could mean anything from days to months. How? Are you holding up? Any more royal lessons with Henrietta? Livia groaned dramatically. She sends daily emails with links to instructional videos. Yesterday's was the proper way to exit a vehicle while wearing a tiara. I'm saving them for when I need a good laugh. Their conversations continued in this vein, a mixture of humor and heartache as they navigated the unexpected challenge of their long-distance marriage. To maintain her spirits during Remy's absence, Livia threw herself into running the bookstore and slowly, carefully getting to know her new in-laws through cautious phone calls and the occasional formal letter. King Alden, Remy's father, remained a distant figure, but Queen Sophia, a warm, intelligent woman who had apparently been a professor of art history before her marriage, became an unexpected ally. He gets his stubbornness from his father, she confided, during one phone call, but his heart is all his own. He has loved books since he was tiny. When he told us about you and your bookstore, I knew immediately why he had fallen so hard. 3 months into their separation, a care package arrived at Livia's door. Inside was an assortment of items that made her simultaneously laugh and cry, a collection of terrible cookies clearly baked by Remy himself. Royal chefs apparently hadn't been consulted. A series of deliberately unflattering selfies taken in various palatial settings, and a hand-drawn map of the palace with areas marked good for hiding from boring dignitaries and secret passage, ideal for midnight snack raids. A note attached read simply, Royal Emergency Supplies. Use as needed. All my love, R. Livia responded in kind, sending packages filled with new books she thought he'd enjoy, small treasures from their favorite spots in the city, and increasingly, elaborate letters detailing the fictional adventures of Lady Henrietta, whom she had reimagined as a secret ninja warrior by night. Finally, after 4 long months, the diplomatic crisis was resolved. Remy called with the news, his face alight, with a joy that transcended the pixelated video. "It's done," he said. "The treaty is signed, the threats have been neutralized, and I'm coming home. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Livia repeated, her heart leaping. "But that's so soon. I need to clean and shop and—" "Just be there," Remy interrupted gently. "That's all I need." The next day, Livia found herself constantly checking the clock as she helped customers, her attention split between recommending books and watching the door. By closing time, there was still no sign of Remy, and she tried to quell her disappointment. International travel was complicated, especially for royalty. Delays were to be expected. She was shelving the last of the returns, her back to the door, when the bell chimed. "I'm sorry, we're closed," she called without turning around. "Even for a customer who's traveled approximately 5,000 miles to see you?" asked a familiar voice that sent electricity racing down her spine. Livia whirled around to find Remy standing in the entrance, looking more like the man she'd first met than the prince she'd married. Casual clothes, tousled hair, that same crooked smile that never failed to make her heart skip. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, drinking in the sight after so long apart. Then she was running, and he was catching her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace so tight it nearly hurt. They clung to each other, neither willing to let go, as if the months of separation might reassert themselves if they loosened their hold even slightly. "You're here," Livia whispered against his neck, breathing in the scent of him, a mix of his familiar cologne and something new, something that hinted at the far-off places he'd been. "I'm here," he confirmed, setting her down, but keeping her within the circle of his arms. "And I've had a revelation while we were apart." "Oh?" she asked, trying to memorize his face all over again, noting the new lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight darkening of his stubble. "I've realized that being a prince means nothing if I can't be with the person I love," he said seriously. "Titles, wealth, duty, none of it matters without you." Livia reached up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the curve of his cheek. "That's very romantic, but I'm pretty sure your country would disagree about the duty part." Remy laughed, the sound vibrating through her. "Always the practical one. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that I want us to find a balance. A way to honor my responsibilities to Aldovia, while also preserving what makes us, us. And what does that look like exactly?" His eyes sparkled with that familiar enthusiasm that always preceded his more adventurous ideas. "What if we split our time? 6 months in Aldovia, fulfilling royal obligations and letting you terrify Lady Henrietta with your refreshing disregard for protocol. 6 months here, running your bookstore and living like, well, not exactly normal people, but closer to it." "And the security team?" Livia asked, raising an eyebrow. "Will they be alphabetizing the fiction section, or should I reserve them for heavier lifting in nonfiction?" "They're surprisingly good at shelving," Remy assured her with mock seriousness. "I've had them practicing." Livia laughed, then sobered as she considered the implications of his proposal. "Do you really think it could work? Us having a foot in both worlds?" "I think," Remy said, drawing her closer, "that we can make any arrangement work as long as we're together. And there's one more thing." He took a deep breath, as if preparing himself. "I want us to start a foundation together, a literacy and education initiative. Something that combines your passion for books with the resources I have access to. We could make a real difference, Liv." The sincerity in his voice, the perfect alignment of his suggestion with dreams she had harbored but thought impossible, it overwhelmed her. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who saw her completely and loved her for exactly who she was. Prince or photographer, it didn't matter. He was her Remy. On one condition, she said, blinking back tears of joy, anything. The next day, Livia found herself constantly checking the clock as she helped customers, her attention split between recommending books and watching the door. By closing time, there was still no sign of Remy, and she tried to quell her disappointment. International travel was complicated, especially for royalty. Delays were to be expected. She was shelving the last of the returns, her back to the door, when the bell chimed. "I'm sorry, we're closed," she called without turning around. "Even for a customer who's traveled approximately 5,000 miles to see you?" asked a familiar voice that sent electricity racing down her spine. Livia whirled around to find Remy standing in the entrance, looking more like the man she'd first met than the prince she'd married. Casual clothes, tousled hair, that same crooked smile that never failed to make her heart skip. For a moment they simply stared at each other, drinking in the sight after so long apart. Then she was running, and he was catching her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace so tight it nearly hurt. They clung to each other, neither willing to let go, as if the months of separation might reassert themselves if they loosened their hold even slightly. "You're here," Livia whispered against his neck, breathing in the scent of him, a mix of his familiar cologne and something new, something that hinted at the far-off places he'd been. "I'm here," he confirmed, setting her down but keeping her within the circle of his arms. "And I've had a revelation while we were apart." "Oh?" she asked, trying to memorize his face all over again, noting the new lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight darkening of his stubble. "I've realized that being a prince means nothing if I can't be with the person I love," he said seriously. "Titles, wealth, duty, none of it matters without you." Livia reached up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the curve of his cheek. "That's very romantic, but I'm pretty sure your country would disagree about the duty part." Remy laughed, the sound vibrating through her. "Always the practical one. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that I want us to find a balance. A way to honor my responsibilities to Aldovia while also preserving what makes us, us. And what does that look like exactly?" His eyes sparkled with that familiar enthusiasm that always preceded his more adventurous ideas. "What if we split our time? 6 months in Aldovia, fulfilling royal obligations and letting you terrify Lady Henrietta with your refreshing disregard for protocol. 6 months here, running your bookstore and living like, well, not exactly normal people, but closer to it." "And the security team?" Livia asked, raising an eyebrow. "Will they be alphabetizing the fiction section, or should I reserve them for heavier lifting in nonfiction?" "They're surprisingly good at shelving," Remy assured her with mock seriousness. "I've had them practicing." Livia laughed, then sobered as she considered the implications of his proposal. "Do you really think it could work? Us having a foot in both worlds?" "I think," Remy said, drawing her closer, "that we can make any arrangement work as long as we're together. And there's one more thing." He took a deep breath, as if preparing himself. "I want us to start a foundation together, a literacy and education initiative, something that combines your passion for books with the resources I have access to. We could make a real difference, Liv." The sincerity in his voice, the perfect alignment of his suggestion with dreams she had harbored but thought impossible. It overwhelmed her. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who saw her completely and loved her for exactly who she was. Prince or photographer, it didn't matter. He was her Remy. "On one condition," she said, blinking back tears of joy, anything.